Hello, everyone. My name is Rich Ottinger, and I am the Marketing Programs Manager for Park Systems. Welcome to the next installment of Park Systems 2020 Material Science Research and AFM webinar series. Today's presentation is titled 4D Printing and Stimuli Response. Before we begin, let me give you a quick overview of today's session. The presentation is expected to take about 40 to 45 minutes, which should allow us some time for a question and answer period at the end. If you click the raise your hand button at that time, I can unmute your line to ask a question. If you would prefer, you may type in your questions at any time during the webinar, and I will try to pose those at the end. Any of the questions that we do not get to, we will address in a follow-up email. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Rigoberto Advincula. Dr. Advincula is a professor of macromolecular science and engineering at Case Western Reserve University and the editor-in-chief of MRS Communications. He's a fellow of the American Chemical Society and is the author of more than 250 peer-reviewed publications. Please welcome Dr. Rigoberto Advincula.
Thank you, Richard, and I hope this comes across clear and the video rate is good as well. I would like to thank again Park Systems for the opportunity to give this webinar, and I'm still with Case Western Reserve University as research professor, though I recently have my new affiliation too with University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and Oak Ridge National Lab. So for those of you who follow this series, of course, I would like to introduce 3D printing, followed by work on stimuli-responsive films, and the definition of 4D printing. So back in 2016, I had an opportunity to give a vision of where 3D printing will go and the variety of applications in industry, research, biomedical engineering, and even outer space. And of course, some of you are familiar by now with the different 3D printer formats or are actively using them. And here is a summary of some of the more common 3D printing methods, such as FDM, fused deposition modeling, SLA, stereolithographic apparatus, or selective laser sintering, such as SLS. We, in fact, use a number of them. And of course, the idea is you have a specific material that can be 3D printed with any of the 3D printing methods as well as the developing ones. The goal, of course, is to have far and as wide an application of 3D printing in many industries, including research needs, but also in trying to join or develop jointly materials research together with design, which is in fact very important for 3D printing in that the more materials available, more types of new applications can be envisioned. So I'd like to start by focusing on polymers. And polymers, interfaces and colloidal phenomena is a specialty in our group, whether it be grafting of polymers or polymers as colloidal particles or mixed brushes or hydro. We are very interested in a variety of surface phenomena and the application of polymers. So when we say stimuli-responsive materials or polymers, we have many types of defining it. But one definition I can give in terms of stimuli-responsive polymers is what can be found in terms of micelles, nanogels, oil and water interface, and the ability to change its shape or dynamics in the presence of stimuli. And what is important to note is that stimuli-responsive materials need to have a field effect or the application of temperature, pressure, electric field, light field in order to change or elicit stimuli, a response from that particular stimuli. So in the case of polymers, we can define them at the nano to microscopic level, such that we can control their swelling behavior, their contraction, their micellization, or equilibration at the interface. So when we say stimuli-responsive polymers, on the left you will see types of stimuli that can be applied, whether it's temperature, pH, magnetic field, mechanical field. In turn, this will elicit a response on the polymer that results in change in shape, mechanical properties, permeability, phase separation, optical, and electrical properties as well. So I mentioned our group is focused on polymer materials. In particular, we have done a lot of work on polymers at interfaces, or the chemistry of interfaces and interfacial phenomena, as shown in the type of work we have reported in this cover pages as well. And for example, we have done a lot of work on grafting polymers on surfaces or polymer brushes, which can be grafted using controlled initiators, as well as the patterning of different types of polymers. Another specialty in our group is to work on polyelectrolyte multilayers. These are electrostatically adsorbed or equilibrated polymer materials that can be used to lay flat on a surface or take the shape of a colloidal particle, or even a route toward the hollow shell particles. So for example, we have done and shown stimulating polymer brushes by mimicking the property of a lotus leaf. So lotus leaf is known to be a super hydrophobic surface simply because of the hierarchy of roughness and the failure to form a continuous line tension or entrapment of air. And this is well known as a Casey-Baxter phenomena or condition. So for example, to produce a stimuli-responsive lotus leaf, what we did is we mimicked the surface of a lotus leaf using the chemistry I previously described, which is the grafting of polymer brushes and polyelectrolytes, the result of which, as shown in the SEM image below, is an artificial lotus leaf that has stimuli responsive properties. And we will characterize this with microscopy and optical or spectroscopic microscopy as well, in order to verify the synthesis of such features. So in this case, the stimuli response was proven by the temperature field. So for example, by changing the temperature up to 15 degrees Celsius, heating or cooling converts it from a super hydrophobic to a hydrophilic or super wetting material. And this is a matter of the polymer brush of the polynipam that was attached to that artificial surface, and a matter of heating it between 15 degrees Celsius. So from ambient to 40 degrees C, you change the hydrophobic property as well as the preservation of the Casey-Baxter surface to produce this response. And in fact, this stimuli response is cyclical. So we can shift from super hydrophobic to ultra wetting in a matter of 15 degrees Celsius, whereas an unpatterned surface or flat surface cannot do that. In another method that we demonstrated this type of chemistry is in the case of micro-patterned oxygen plasma etch surfaces, which result in a variety of shapes. So in this case, this is not 3D printing, and hold your horses because we have a lot of 3D printing to show. But what I'm trying to show is that we can do this in the nanoscale, microscale, but we can also do it in the macro scale of the 3D printing process. So anyway, to continue this illustration, we made these patterns with different patterns using oxygen ion etching to make the template. And then we varied the surface chemistry with polyelectrolytes. And then we stamped these materials on surfaces such that we were able to show what I call origami effect. So for example, here is the SCM, an optical or optical spectroscopic IR optical imaging, as well as AFM, of those features as shown in this dimension, also about 150 microns. And the reason we made this shape is that this cross shape has the ability to fold, so that's your property, by a stimuli afforded by a solvent. So for example, as shown here, those crosses that we form, they start folding the sides and show that we are able to control their stimuli response simply by the environment and exposure of those particles. And we were able to expose them on cylindrical surface as well as tuning fork surfaces. So back to the macroscopic level, in fact, this is easier demonstrated the Shapememory material, or if you are more familiar with origami, then you know what I'm driving at. The origami approach allows you to make different shapes, three-dimensional shapes, based on the folding of design structures that will give you shape through a mechanical effect. And the folding, actuation, tuning in bulk materials has, of course, demonstrated and is popular. And it's intriguing to see or ask if such type of concepts can be applied towards flexible electronics. And there's a lot of interest in display material, sensors, and flexible electronics. So the talk is focused on 4D printing. And the reason I gave that initial background is to show to you that 3D printing, 4D printing allows us then to combine the design and materials in order to produce a new effect based on stimuli response of both the material and the 3D printed object. A lot of this was reported by Skylar Tidwell, who actually from MIT, who actually coined the term 4D printing. But what I'm driving at and what many people recognize this is simply stimuli responsive by design, or if you may, with 3D printing by design and the material that you use. So for example, 3D printing as extended to 4D printing will allow one to make a variety of shapes. A good example could be a Shapememory nickel alloy or 19 material that is used for stents, okay? Or different types of designs or cylinders as shown here that can control flow behavior. And many types of materials have been explored, including metals and polymers. But here, I'm very interested, of course, in soft matter or polymer material. So a very simple concept that I showed you earlier is the 3D printing origami approach. So using that Japanese design or inspired design. The question is, how can you 3D print an object or a precursor object such that you can control the folding in the presence of stimuli? And this can be done, for example, in an origami approach by producing the creases and folds on specific locations, let's say, of this flat object. The result is that you will have you will have a distribution of hinges and folding that is, in this case, can be affected by heat and the type of stretching or by eggshell design. And as you will know later, what's important with or an advantage of 3D printing is you can actually orient the 3D printing of the material such that you can optimize the mechanical properties as well as the ability to fold. So for example, many cases have been reported where these architectures can be 3D printed or designed as shown here. And you can make very complicated objects out of let's say, a printed or a two-dimensional design if you are able to control the placement of those truss, hinges, and corners. And so with the right material or the right stimuli, in this case, when you start folding one side, you will prepare an object that is basically a fourth dimension 4D that is an outcome of the initially 3D printed design and material as well. And here are more examples of that 2D to 3D to 4D transition. So from flat to three-dimensional to 4D, you can convert the axes if you design them well such that without using gears or without using arms, one is able to elicit movement or mechanical movement based on the design. So a lot of this folding can be simulated or can be designed architecturally and then converted to a CAD design and then finally 3D printed. In case of a different material, let's say a hydrogel that is able to take on water and can fold based on the stimuli that is afforded by light or heat, or in this case, moisture. One can look at biologically inspired engineering as a very particular or inspiring direction for 4D printing. That is, you can mimic nature or you can elicit response on a 3D printed object simply by combining, again, the design and in this case, the hydrogel nature of the material. So this gives you an opening towards things that can be used to, again, simulate or be mimicking nature or change the color or electroluminescence, or in this case, the application of liquid crystalline materials or birefringence. And therefore, the type of response you get is not only mechanical, but here you can see a change in color, which can be affected by the type of liquid crystalline orientation and the application of appropriate fields such as light or even electromagnetic field. In the case of 3D printing for tissues or tissue engineering, again, this type of response can be done on the scaffold itself or can be used effectively to orient the growth of specific cells, let's say in tissue engineering, which is very important for proliferation and population of this type of cells that can be used to, let's say, replicate a liver tissue. Okay. Other type of materials are based on the elastomeric nature, and I will give many examples of this on our specific talk. So here, a 4D type of response is observed when a 3D printed object, a stretchable UV curable elastomer, can be stretched up to more than 1,000%. And this can be used as balloons, soft actuators, grippers, and electrical switches. In this case, the illustration below shows that the gripper can essentially be used to grab objects by the elastomeric response of the 3D printed photopolymerized material. So in the case of shape memory materials, which some of you may be familiar, the shape memory is elicited by the orientation and the distribution of phases, whether it's the crystalline, semi-crystalline, and then the freezing, quote unquote, or entrapment of those phases, let's say by cross-linking. The result is you can change the material properties, let's say, by controlling one or two of the phase aspects. In this case, the degree of crystallinity or amorphous transition can be controlled by heating or melting. And then the presence of the cross-link material preserves the shape. Hence, a shape memory essentially is the effect, in this case, of the robustness of a cross-link thermoset or thermoset elastomer. And then the change in shape can be elicited and be stimulated by heat, such that the cycle between crystalline to amorphous phases changes in shape. So shape memory means that the original shape can be retained, can be converted back to the original shape with the appropriate stimuli. So in other words, when you first form the object, if you maintain that shape is in memory of that polymer, and therefore you can go back to that original shape when it was formed as your resting state. Now, another type of shape memory material, as I mentioned, is used in stents or different types of biomedical applications. And actually, as shown here, 4D printing the right material or composite material, in this case, can result in the ability to form folds or three-dimensional structure. You can essentially program the shape and change them with different combinations of heat or mechanical um, response such that you can cycle them from one form or the other. And this ability to go to various shapes simply means that you have a handle or several handles, in this case, both mechanical and temperature, to change the response. And this is might as well be a very good explanation or example of what we call 4D printing using composite materials. Okay. Or in the case of this photopolymerized material, so you have the Eiffel Tower and this dove, and you can have the initial shape, which is actually at a higher temperature, but as you fold or squeeze them, and then you apply the appropriate temperature, you can make them change shape or go back to another previous shape. So this shape memory material properties is essentially 4D printing because the property is hidden when you first print the object, but then the application of the appropriate stimuli unlocks the other property that was originally present during 4D printing. Here is another example that it can be applied towards autonomous robotics in that body of a microfluidic logic device, which can be prepared by a combination of patterning, printing, and the use of hydrogel material can result in mimicking the movement of, let's say, an octopus. So what I'm driving at is all these principles eventually will be useful for soft robotics or the ability to use 3D printing as a route towards using elastomeric or thermoset elastomeric materials that can be used to actuate or have movement without the use of gears, arms, or different mechanical devices that are lead to make robot devices and objects. And some of this we were starting in collaboration with Professor Lee, who has since moved to where we were interested in 3D printing different types of origami-like designs in order to improve the movement of, let's say, a robotic arm of metals. So in our group, as a summary, we have endeavored to do a lot of 3D printing based on nanocomposite materials in techniques like FDM, VSP, SLA, and so on. And in fact, we have had many publications last year as well as this year. So one of our favorite materials is thermoplastic polyurethane. So TPU can be 3D printed using a filament, but in our case, we made our own filament that has reinforcement of, let's say, graphene. And polyurethane is very important industrially for a variety of objects, especially in devices, machines, industrial tools, but also in the automotive industry, the biomedical arena. Okay. So the interest on TPU means that we are not only looking at plastics, but we are also looking at foams or different types of chemistries. So for example, polyurethane foam, you are probably more familiar with this as your seat cushion. The polyurethane foam is usually prepared using a chemical or a physical blowing agent and a reactive chemistry from the monomeric diisocyanate and polyol. So it's actually interesting that with 3D printing, we can make our own 4D response or stimuli response by using a thermoplastic polyurethane that we can then deposit, let's say, with FDM or viscous solution printing to produce a material. So in our case, we actually use VSP, which I sometimes call a ketchup printer, or a printer for cement or chocolate. And this relies on the extrusion of a viscous material that, again, with CNC movement in the 3D printer, allows you to deposit at room temperature with the right shear thinning and thixotropic behavior. Will give you a elastomeric or thermoset elastomeric material. So actually, we have reported this in previous talks and papers, where we took the thermoplastic polyurethane, loaded it up with nanoclay, and then used this formulation to do 3D printing of objects as shown here. Now, the logic is we can make different types of objects, but we can demonstrate mechanical response or stimuli response based on design. So in this case, we designed both the size of the grids or opening, as shown here, and also the porosity of the material based on the nanoclay that was added in concentration and then removal to form a porous material. So here, for example, after swelling it with hydrophobicity, the different cubes with openings, different size openings, as well as a different porosity of each material that can be controlled by the amount of the nanoclay incorporated. So the question is, why is this combination potent? Well, what you have here is the incorporation of a 3D printing design, which is the size of the opening and the formation of the grid structure, as well as a polymer or material design that controls the porosity. So one can look at the change in density, the opening, and its resulting effect on the compression modulus, but perhaps more visible is the movie. So for example, when we first 3D printed these old objects, depending on the pore size or the opening of the cube, it has more of a plastic behavior, or when we increase the size of the opening, we get some elastomeric behavior. But dramatically, when we took object A, as shown here, and then swell it with hydrofluoric acid and inducing porosity, that plastic material is converted into a foam, into an elastomeric foam. And again, depending on the loading of clay and the amount or design of the object, we can change their compressibility. So what this means is we are able to use 3D printing and the material property itself to elicit a new response. And in fact, these materials are classified as super elastic materials with up to 1,000 cycles in repeatability with 60% compression retention. Okay, and we in fact use this object practically as a switch to light LED diodes with an impregnated carbon black surface. So what I'm going to show you are some work that we have done as an extension of this work. In this case, we use a silicone material. This silicone material were 3D printed as different objects, as shown here, with a formulation that shows the um, uh, amount of PDMS and silicone oil added. The reason is that by varying the amount of silicone oil and salt, we are able to change again the porosity. So similar to the previous work, we have a thixotropic shear thinning material that we can 3D print. We can 3D print these nice objects, control the porosity, and again, this object shows super compressibility or elasticity with up to 60% compression at 1,000 cycles. Now, what's interesting and different with this object is that we have super hydrophobicity. So the presence of silicone oil and the opening and porosity actually prevents water from ingressing or seeping in the material. As shown by the blue dots, the water is not able to penetrate this 3D printed object, but because of the presence of silicone oil, it's actually a sponge for oil. So you can see here the model oil or nonpolar material was soaked easily. The red color chloroform material was soaked easily using this 3D printed object with very high retention or absorbency of material up to 1,000% more and high repeatability. So I would not suggest this as a oil spill cleanup material. That would be expensive. But then it just shows you that 3D printing together with the right material will give you a very different response when it comes to absorbency. And these are actually multi-material, very stretchable materials, and we can use 3D printing as well. Now, a more recent work we have is in the use of Shapememory isotropic thermosets based on polybenzoxazine. So for example, with FDM, you typically use a filament that you then melt on a head. But what if you directly melt, let's say, a pellet or powder, and then extrude that melt material, and you can 3D print it? So this is not a type of filament FDM, but this could be what could be classified as a particulate or pellet FDM. So the chemistry we use is based on the reaction of DEGBA, or is a diglycidyl ether, which is quite popular for making epoxy, and then bisphenol A derived benzoxazine. So we synthesize this special monomer. What it does is that the benzoxazine is capable of copolymerizing with the epoxy, such that we can 3D print these two starting materials at a slightly elevated temperature, and then finalize the cure, and by keeping the shape as it was 3D printed, will enable shape memory materials. Now, a key ingredient that we added on this benzoxazine and epoxy structure is actually carbon nanotube. Carbon nanotube here has several roles. It is useful for changing the viscosity of the material. And secondly, it's capable of adding electrical conductivity. And in this case too, it actually helped in the shape memory properties, as I will demonstrate to you soon. So the chemistry of the two materials are shown. When you mix the benzoxazine and epoxy, they cross-link as shown in this surface, in this diagram, where the cross-linker can be designed based on the added intermediates or the presence of your amine groups as well. So amine with regards to epoxy, but you have benzoxazine activated by temperature or simple heating to cross-link as well. So using these two cross-linking methods, we were able to 3D print them and produce different shapes as well. So for example, as shown here, this rheologically appropriate materials, in addition to the CNT or carbon nanotube, can be into hard objects as shown here in E. Now, the initial printing with the presence of the carbon nanotube has to be heated at 90 degrees C. And the reason for that is to stabilize the object after you 3D print it, but at the same time, enable it to be completely converted to polybenzoxazine by heating it up to 200 degrees C or Celsius. In this case, since we did not load it with a very high amount of benzoxazine, we only need heating at 90 degrees Celsius in order to preserve the shape or the material. So another consequence of this is, since this is actually a thermoset that we 3D printed, these are isotropically oriented properties. In other words, independent of the direction of printing, we get the same properties in terms of the tensile strength, modulus, and toughness. It's because it's a thermoset material. Now, the Fordeep effect as shown here. So when we initially form the star or starfish, if you want to look at it that way, we can heat the form and then cool the object. And we can cycle, let's say, this shape memory or change um, in one, unfortunately, only in one direction. We are working on a cyclical mechanism and material. So for example, this shape change occurs in a matter of 30 seconds. So when we heat, which deforms the material, cool it, it retains the shape, and then after 30 seconds, it starts flattening. And as you can see here, folding, or the ability to change the fold and the amount of time it takes to fold, qualifies it as a combination of the 3D printing design as well as the composition of the material we have. Now, let me finish our talk today with this last example, in that in collaboration with the we have actually made a reprocessable or recyclable 3D printed conducting elastomeric composite foam, which actually showed some sensing behavior as well as actuation. So a very simple formulation based on using the same TPU and clay that I gave as a first illustration. But in this case, the black material, which is simple carbon black, depending on the percolation threshold and the pathway it's created during compression, converts from a non-conducting material to a conducting material. So we played around with a variety of compositions as shown here, or levels of loading of carbon black and nanoclay. The result is we were able to optimize the viscosity and printability of this material such that we can print 3D different objects. And again, as shown, these are 3D printable materials. We can sandwich thermoplastic polyurethane and sandwich the carbon black containing thermoplastic polyurethane, as well as induce the porosity based on the amount of porogens we added to the material. The result is we have a sensing material. In fact, this is a sensing material for motion. So in this case, we loaded up the sensor material as shown in C on a shoe sole, and then we walk, we jump, we bend, and you can see the change in stress or the response as shown in graph D. And moreover, we can determine the right percolation threshold as well as the cyclic representation, reproducibility of that response. Moreover, what's interesting is that these materials also have a gas sensing capability. So in this case, it can differentiate between chloroform, methanol, hexanol, although we have not done a lot of figures of merit, yet it showed a concentration response and a slope change depending on vapor that was present. And then lastly, actually, as reported in this paper, we were able to recycle this material or simply melt it again and then 3D print a different object, and we're able to reuse it. So this is a reusable motion as well as gas sensor. Now, I do not have a conclusion slide, except that I hope the audience have had an appreciation of what it means to unlock a property on what we call 4D printing by a combination of design, shape, and the chemistry or composition of the material itself. And of course, the stimuli which you provide, whether heat, electric field, optical field, temperature, etc., will elicit a particular response. And then lastly, the term shape memory is very much applicable to what we can 3D print in objects, and I believe also in metal alloys. So with that, I'd like to thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Dr. Advincula. We do have one question that came in, which I will ask you, and if anybody else has a question, please get that typed into the questions module or raise your hand and I will unmute your line after this one. Could you please explain how to immobilize the polymer from the 3D printer to a Petri dish to measure elastic responses in liquid with AFM?
Okay, so that question means that if you have a 3D printed, and I'm just guessing whether it's different types of printing methods, or one can go to what we call micro 3D printing, or two-photon polymerization to produce microstructures by 3D printing. This can be either 3D printed first and then adhered, or use a glue, basically use a glue to deposit the 3D printed object on a Petri dish. Or you can even use a Petri dish as the base for 3D printing. And that means you have to basically load or stick the Petri dish at the 3D printer. As I've shown you in the clearest demonstration I have here, the method called viscous solution printing is probably one of the most versatile, if not one of my favorite 3D printing methods, in that we can 3D print at room temperature. The only requirement is that the paste material has to be a shear thinning and isotropic, or is able to retain its shape when first printed.
Okay, well, I don't see any other questions coming in, so I will ask my usual final question. Feel free to keep sending those questions in, though, as we go. Can you give us a brief preview of next month's webinar topic, which is titled 3D Printing Testing for Mechanical Properties?
Certainly, Richard. And again, I'd like to thank the audience, the loyal followers of this series, and of course, Park Systems for the opportunity to give this talk. The testing of mechanical properties on 3D printed objects is very, very important. The reason is that the more we use 3D printing as a route for fabrication or manufacturing, the more it will find its uses in replacing what has been traditionally made by formative manufacturing, which includes injection molding, thermoforming, etc. So there's a lot of ASTM, ISO standards that have been reported with those, and they are qualified or used to predict failure. On the other hand, with 3D printing materials, the standards are still evolving. But yet you can use the same standards used for monolithic materials, except that you have to pay attention to the orientation as well as the composition of the material. So yes, in the next webinar, you will learn more about material properties and testing, especially with thermomechanical properties.
Great. Thank you, Doctor. Please join us for that session on Friday, June 19th, once again at noon Eastern Daylight Time. Thank you all for joining us for this session. You can find more information about Park Systems AFM at parksystems.com. And please direct any AFM questions you have to inquiry@parksystems.com. If you have any questions specific to this webinar series, feel free to reach out to me directly at richard@parksystems.com. Thanks again for joining, and stay safe, everyone.